Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 5 of the Solvitor podcast. It's a pleasure to be joined by Dan Demaria, who has had a very interesting career in the marketing profession. Dan, do you want to just start off by just like explaining a bit what you do, especially because you own your own company now, and like what led to that?
Sounds good. G'day, guys. G'day, Solus. G'day, Linus, and your listeners and viewers. Yes, Dan Demaria is my name. So my story is I was a marketer for, many years, over 30 years. I started in advertising agencies, first in Adelaide, in my hometown, where we are now. Moved to Sydney in my early 20s and basically worked the rounds of advertising agencies, all the big multinationals, the Young and Rubicon Group, Leo Burnett. Went to Hong Kong with J. Walter Thompson. There I worked across 7 countries for the Australian Tourist Commission. Came back to Sydney, again, more advertising agencies, and then came to Adelaide in the early 2000s. My mum and dad are here, and I wanted to have kids in Adelaide where they were, so I jumped into marketing. I ran thoroughbred racing SA's marketing for 3 years that I was here. And then I went to News Corp for 14 years and I ran the marketing department there. So basically a career of advertising and marketing. Schooled here in Adelaide. And I guess that's a little bit about sort of confidence of where sort of it started for me, but we can talk about that a little bit. I met your father, Linus, at Blackfriars here in Adelaide. So there's a story in itself. Went right through University of Adelaide, another uni, and then finished my uni in Sydney with the University of Technology studying marketing. So yeah, in a snapshot, that's my career.
But you don't just do marketing. You also yourself have 2 podcasts, I believe.
Yes.
One of which Solus and I are doing today. With your confidence levels, obviously being in a big corporation, you're going to have confidence in your skills, but with the podcasting environment, you not only got to have confidence in your skills, but also in your people skills. So how does your job translate your confidence in podcasting?
Great question. So podcasting started, I'd actually probably go back to university. I had a really bad radio show called Breakfast with the Beast with Student Radio 5UV. So I came in the classic Tuesday morning slot, 12:30 a.m. to 1:30 a.m. So, graveyard shift. Had about 2 listeners, one of which was my mum. And sort of, learnt my trade there, just really taught myself how to present, how to edit. We had reel-to-reel tapes, so we physically had to chop up tape and edit interviews. So it was a really good learning curve. I then graduated to the primetime spot of 10 p.m. Monday, where I had a student current affairs show called Page 3. Here in Australia, we had a tabloid TV show called Page 1, and it was really bad current affairs, and mine was really bad student affairs based on Page 3, and obviously Page 3 quite well in the UK. So from there, I sort of jumped forward, did my uni, did my career, and I got to last year, I left News Corp after 14 years, jumped out and decided to start my own marketing consultancy called Brand Nexus. And during that time, I'd sort of treated it as a bit of a gap year as well. I wanted to have a stab at podcasting. I've listened to a lot of podcasts over the years. Joe Rogan, before he went crazy, was sort of a good influence for me. Elon Musk, and not the MMA podcast so much. I wasn't into MMA, but more so he used to interview cosmopolitists, people that look at the cosmos, really interesting scientists. And I really liked his unstructured sort of 3 hours of a conversation. Like, it was very low touch and unedited.
He is very unstructured. That's what I love about this method of conversation in particular, is like he just goes. Some of his episodes, they start when they're just like chatting, and then he goes, are we rolling? I love that. And it allows that free conversation, and it allows you to get into topics that can actually relate to people who are literally on their way to work, or is just sitting in their homes. You might be talking about back trouble or aging, like anything like these famous people. So I really like that. With regards to I think Solus, you had a couple of really good questions that I wanted to dive into. So actually did some work for this podcast. Something you did it.
Yeah, well, one of us has to do a bit of work, Linus? But yeah, so Dan, so obviously listen to the podcast, The Work, and like I said, sort of off camera, I couldn't stop laughing when I was listening to it or smiling. But as far as, well, something I wanted to touch on first was just about the sort of Aussie-Brit divide, because obviously the person that you had on the guest was Spudnik, and he's an Aussie as well. And so I really liked the dynamics between you both. But I wanted to ask your opinion, just sort of starting off. Do you think that Aussies are more confident than Brits, sort of just in general?
I think it's a very good question. I think we're very laid back, and I think worldwide we're seen as being very casual and laid back. So I think in that regard, that exudes a bit of confidence as well. I think it's to us here in Australia, things don't really matter that much. And I guess that's sort of a segue into confidence. It's about what's the worst that could happen in life. We can give that a try. If it doesn't work, we move on. Maybe it's the fact that the sun's shining, and if things don't go to plan, we just go out and have a surf, or sit on the beach or have a beer. So I think in that way we're pretty chilled. Australians generally are quite hardworking and professional. I think a lot of people in the UK, they go over from Australia to work there, and a lot of people in the UK, remark how hardworking Australians are. And I think that's probably more the motivation if you do get out of the country and move to another country, that you're going to have make a real go of it. So I think we are hardworking, professional, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're self-deprecating, and I think that's a great asset to have as an Australian. And I think that sort of I think that segues into confidence a little bit as well.
Yeah, you mentioned something else I wanted to touch upon there. So moving into a different country. So obviously you worked in Hong Kong for a bit. I wanted to just hear a bit more about that, and if you had any reservations when sort of first going there, and how you overcame them.
Look, Hong Kong was a real experience, because I'd worked in a Sydney agency for a couple of years. So I guess I sort of went up the ranks as a account executive, account manager, and then I got recruited to be a regional account director at 25. And I was way out of my comfort zone and way out of my depth. To be honest, I probably wasn't ready to go into a big role like that. New country, not just a new country, but it was a whole region. So we had to look after 7 countries, from Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, 7 countries, 7 cultures, 7 currencies. So I was way out of my comfort zone. So I guess in terms of confidence, you fake it till you make it. And that's something I've always believed in. You jump in a role in the deep end and you swim like crazy until you work it out. A lot of people prefer to get really sort of trained up and confident and then move into their role. I'd rather just throw myself in it. We talk a lot about, and one of the agencies I worked at, DDB back in Sydney, had a mantra, freedom to fail. And I love that, because in order to grow, you've got to make mistakes. And to make mistakes, you shouldn't see it as a failure. You should see it as learning. And I've always had the mantra, what's the worst that could happen? And I think I took that to the role in Hong Kong. I just sort of got in there, threw myself in there, made mistakes along the way. But that's the best way to learn, when you make mistakes. As long as no one dies, no one died, on my watch. So I wouldn't say if you're a surgeon to do that. Anything involved in actually saving lives, I wouldn't actually suggest that approach. But any other approach, I think just go and do it. Have confidence in that. We're all people. You're not interacting with bots, machines. We're all people and human at heart. So there's empathy that people will understand if you make mistakes.
Obviously, as well, on top of that, we're young guys. We're living in a much different world to what you were living in when you were our age. And I think there's a lot of panickers out there nowadays, a lot more than maybe in your generation, because there's always people saying, oh, but what if you keep asking yourself, what if? You're just going to sit there and ask yourself, what if, while the rest of us just do, right? Obviously, as on top of that, I know this was I'm stealing your question, mate.
No, that's all right. Happy to
share.
On
top of that, we've got a very politically tense environment which we're living in. It's very political, and you see that the most when you're at university. There's not a laid-back attitude at all towards free thought or politics or opinions, and it can require that extra edge of confidence to actually be in conversations and feel free to sort of what you want to just the average person. And then even taking it further, like stuff when I'm on stage and I'm doing something, like I get very nervous, not with regards to my abilities, but more with regards to if some person out there is going to get offended, right? Do you think that, do you see that change, or are we just whining about it, or is it something that's actually?
Yeah, no, very much see that change. It's really interesting. I think there's two things at play here. I grew up as Generation X. My wife will say I'm a baby boomer, but that's completely wrong because I'm a 69 baby. And Gen X, I think we grew up in an era where we went through recessions. We did things pretty hard. When I joined the corporate world was 1989, just after a big recession when Wall Street crashed. So I think there's a generational thing that you guys are from a different generation. But I totally agree with the political correctness, the wokeness, I guess, angle these days. And it plays into a lot of what we do. The two guys I do my podcast with, so one is called Mark Bickley. He's a ex-captain of the Adelaide Crows AFL team. So the AFL, Australian Football League, play in Australia. The Crows were the first team from South Australia, the national competition, and Mark was the first captain that actually won 2 premierships. So in 1997, 1998, he went on to become a broadcaster, and we started our show called the Pub Test. Another guy, Sputnik, as you've listened to the work, that's a podcast about the advertising industry. And we know the audience for that is a very narrow, tight audience. It's basically 8 guys like us, similar sort of age in our sort of 40s and early 50s. And that's about advertising. We talk very freely. We drop the F-bomb a lot, as you heard. But on both shows, we talk a lot about social issues. We talk about advertising and showing diversity, for example. And we have pretty strong views. And I think you can't be sitting on the fence. If you have a view, you've got to sort of, I guess, defend that view, but be cognizant of others. That I think we have to have the discussion, we have to have the argument. We never play the man, we play the ball. And then that's the sort of parlance in AFL that when you're having a tough competition, you always go for the ball, you don't tackle the man. It's nothing ever personal. So we generally are we're pretty progressive in our attitudes. We're all about equality, diversity. We're all about all the right things. But we won't always, I guess, be the most popular view. We may have a differing view, and I think you've got to be confident in giving that view if you can back it up. We have a lot of debates and discussion where we may have opposing views ourselves, and that's okay. It's a respectful discussion. I think we're always conscious as broadcasters or narrowcasters, as I say. We know people are going to be listening to us, that the views we express sometimes may not always gel with our listeners, and that's okay. I think you've just got to be confident to have the discussion, have the debate, and be open to other points of view, but don't sit on the fence. Have a view and be confident that you can back yourself in that view, but also be open-minded.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And to anyone listening, there's a lot of people nowadays scared of conversation. And some of the best conversations I've actually had have been, with, for example, with my flatmate, very opposite ends of the spectrum politically, but we've had some fantastic discussions about stuff where we're on the opposite sides. And then in the end, we end up kind of changing each other's views and sort of all through that just medium of discussion. I think that's really important. Solis has just recently done a stint in a law firm. And we were talking about a lot lately about the difference between being a student and being in the workplace. Was there a point where you used your confidence to just change, become more professional but still retain your personality in the workplace? Because I know it is difficult, that initial change, and a lot of people our age are about to make that change. So do you have any advice with regards to that?
Totally, yeah. Just be authentic is all I could really give that advice about. I grew up, I guess, my primary school, I went to a pretty rough school in a working class suburb. And for some reason, I got in well with the bullies. I don't know why, but my dad used to tell, he was the originator of dad jokes. He had the best or the worst dad jokes. And I used to tell a few, and the tough kids in the school sort of had me as the court jester in their team. they'd push me over and say, Danny, tell me a joke. And I'd get up and, hey, did you hear the one about blah, blah, blah? And I guess from there, I realized humor can disarm people. And I sort of built my confidence early there, because I knew if I had a sort of an arsenal of dad jokes, that I can drop them in at any stage. So these sort of the bullies, the tough kids of the school would roam around, and I sort of be in their group, just being that court jester sort of kid. So I guess I took that through high school. Your dad is very much a court jester as well. He's got the worst dad jokes and the best dad jokes, as you'd know. And then through university and into the workplace, because I think with the workplace, you've got to be more cognizant that if you're too inappropriate, if you like, HR will sort of call you up and have a bit of a discussion with you. But at the same token, you need to have a personality.
Is that speaking from experience?
Yeah, many times. But, it's always with a good nature and heart. When I went into the workforce, my first job in 1989 was in advertising. And back then, in the 80s and 90s, advertising agencies were the epicenter of political incorrectness. If I took you back then, some of the things that went on there would never happen today. I mean, there was nothing serious, but it was a lot of inappropriate jokes by today's standards. But I think you've got to have your own personality that you carve out. I work in branding. We talk about what a brand stands for, what the brand's personality is, what the values are, and all a brand is as a human. So it's the same as saying, what's Linus's personality? What are his values? What does he stand for? So I think if you want to be known for something, you sort of carve that out. And for me, I think, humor was that. I was professional, but I was sort of probably seen as a bit of the joker. Even in presentations, I had a lot of dry spreadsheets about sales revenue figures, but I'd always managed to find a funny story in there or have a dig at someone. And I guess then it turned a boring, unmemorable presentation into something that is memorable, even if it's a boring spreadsheet presentation. So I always made sure my work presentations had some element of fun in there or humor. And I often got feedback from that to say, they were actually okay to listen to. So, but I think, again, this day and age, you are treading on eggshells a lot, and we've got to be respectful to each other in a gender sense. And I'm totally against sexual harassment in the workplace. That's just not odd at all. But I think we need to have a bit of fun in the workplace as well. And you just got to find that boundary. Where can you push it? The funnier joke is, I guess it gets out to that boundary. But if you step over that boundary, it's not just a gradual drop off at the beach. It's sort of like a cliff. It can potentially drop right off and turn the tables. And that joke turns from funny into actually hurtful and inappropriate. So I think with the podcast as well, we always tread that fine line, particularly with the work. The work, again, it's aimed at basically 8 guys like us, and we take a lot to laugh. So you sort of need to be on that edge, but not over that edge. And knowing we've got a listenership that we could potentially offend, we've got to be always sort of careful there as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the rubbish truck picking up the rubbish bins now.
So, what do you think about that? Because you've obviously been in the workplace. What was it like for you there? I mean, did you nervous at all with maybe what you were saying, or?
Yeah, I think so, Dan. Much like you said, I think humor is a great way to just sort of diffuse a situation. I think if sometimes going into situations, so I was the placement year, and there were other placement students, and I think if you can have a bit of a laugh, then it sort of breaks down the nerves going into summer, sort of for the first time. But as far as what you said about a change between 1989 and sort of now, I guess, for the marketing and advertising industry or sector, would you say there's a lot more barriers to entry for new students trying to get into that field, or what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, it's in my industry in advertising marketing, I think there is, because it was always an adage that anyone could do marketing. Everywhere I worked was marketing. You do all the pretty pictures and stuff. There's pretty pictures involved, but serious marketing is about strategy, developing a business strategy, a marketing strategy, who your target audience is, what your proposition is, what your brand wants to stand for, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, like anyone breaking into the workforce, it's similar to a brand with a consumer's mind. We've got thousands of brands that want our attention every day. So how do you cut through all the noise and deliver a relevant message? It's the same with someone entering the workforce. If you apply for a job, you're there with thousands of different resumes. So how are you going to cut through and get noticed for a start? You know, how you craft your resume, what your pitch is, what your cover letter is. When I was in Hong Kong and I was coming back to Sydney, the company I was with in Hong Kong, we lost the Australian Tourist Commission account in a global pitch. So I went with another global agency. So I had to find another job back in Sydney, and I literally just wrote a note and faxed it back to these guys in Sydney at an agency. And it was so sort of informal, and it was along the lines of, oh, you're probably not looking for someone, but I'm having a go anyway. And they actually said it came through in their fax, and it was so different to everything else they saw that they noticed it and it cut through. They called me and I got the job. So in an ironic way, just the very laid backness of sort of that handwritten note was enough for me to cut through. So I guess it's breaking the workforce. How are you going to be different to everyone else? Obviously, you need to match the criteria for what they're looking for, but you've got to stand up against that noise, out of that noise, and get noticed. And again, humor is always a good professional humor, like not humor for the sake of humor, but sort of humor in the right sense will, generally help you with that.
It's funny you mentioned that. So something else I picked up from when I was watching the work of the podcast is how you were talking about the Super Bowl ad. And there was that QR code that was just popping around just on the screen, just going from side to side. And that was just so different that it stood out. And people in that time, I think you've mentioned people watching it at home or from pubs, they just had their phone on them. They just got it out, scanned the QR code, and it just worked so well.
It was a brilliant execution because I think we came from, I guess, a progression of production where the Michael Bays of the world would produce these amazing 60-second commercials, multi-million-dollar budgets, explosions, cars rolling over the whole thing. But what I loved about this was you think about the environment, again, as I mentioned this on the podcast, the environment of a Super Bowl party. You'd be in a pub, a noisy environment. You'd be in a house with a whole lot of people watching, so much going on, and suddenly everything's silent except for this really low-tech thing floating around the screen, and that's cutting through, getting attention. And the brilliance of that low-tech thing was actually a QR code. So not just did it get your attention, you actually took action and said, what the hell is this? And everyone got their phone out to find out what it was. It was Coinbase. So I love that in that it did two things. At DDB, we talked about ROI, which is obviously return on investment, but ROI for us was also relevance, originality, and impact. And for this QR code ad, you had impact in that it just suddenly got everyone's attention. It had originality because it's so low tech, and then it had relevance because you got your phone out to actually, find out what it was. And of that audience, you'd probably think about 5% saw it as a relevant product, Coinbase. I can't even remember what Coinbase was, to be honest, I think it was a crypto company. Yeah. So if you were into crypto, then it was relevant for you because then you found a crypto provider. So I think for us, the work, it's our passion because we've always done advertising, Sputnik and I. Sputnik that's his legal name, Sputnik. When I came back to Adelaide in 2004, I sort of connected with him. He's really well known, I guess, in advertising circles because he's quite outspoken. He is a little bit of a black sheep, if you like. He's run his own agency for years. He's worked in other agencies. We've got something here, and you picked up probably on the podcast, called the AADC Awards, the Adelaide Advertising and Design Awards. And Sputnik's had a bit of a run-in in years with the AADC. It's a volunteer organisation. I've actually served on it. And it's basically sort of our poor man's version of the Academy Awards for advertising. But every year there's someone complaining about why they won that award, or the criteria was wrong here, or the food was shit here, or whatever it may be. Sputnik's he's written a blog over the years, and he's always been he calls a spade a spade. If something's really good, he'll call it out. If something isn't really good, he'll call it out. And after I did the first podcast with Mark Bickley, I'd always wanted to do one on advertising, and Sputnik I felt was the right person because he had an opinion. He wasn't afraid to use it. And that's where the work started. And that's what we do every week. We review the work locally from Adelaide, but also the country and globally, as we did with the Super Bowl stuff. And we just talk about the best and the worst of what's out there. But again, we play the ball, not the man. Like if the work's crap, we'll call it out, but we'll never be personal about someone's crap. We won't say someone's bad at what they do. We've all done crap ads. I've done crap ads. I've done some good ads, but I think we call out what's good and what we believe people should do better on, and that's the premise about what the work is.
He talks a lot.
Sorry, the rubbish truck's back again. If you can hear that, sorry.
There we go. Well, as long as do you do recycling, Beast?
It is recycling week this week. So yes, green bins alternates with recycling. It's a yellow bin recycling one. We should actually talk about the Beast. So this nickname came about. I went from this rough working class private school working class public school into this private school, Catholic boys' school called Blackfriars, which was an hour away from my home. I got taken down to the train or the bus stop. I was literally the last bus stop on this bus route. That's how far out of town we lived, in a sort of semi-rural environment. And I got to this school, and I met a group of guys. So this school had half were Italian, half were Australian, because it was a Catholic school. And my dad's Italian, my mum's Austrian. I sort of was that sort of midway between the wog and the skip, as we call it, Aussies here, skip, or a can eater, because skips eat food out of a can like baked beans. So I sort of got friendly with the Italian kids and the Australian kids. So again, I was sort of in that middle. I found myself, if there was a side to pick, I could actually easily blend in as a chameleon to the Italian kids side or the Australian kids side. With the Australian kids side, there was a kid called Mansa, Phil Mansa, big, tall, lanky guy. And we sort of
we'll plug him for Mansa Wines. He does fantastic work.
Yeah, one of the sponsors of our show, Mansa Wines, makes a fantastic Australian Shiraz. If you're into Australian wine, you can order it from where you are in London. It's mansawines.com.au. There you go. Mention the show, you get a discount. Well, you can now. I'll mention that to Phil. But also your dad. So your dad obviously was from Cincinnati, Ohio. Had this brash talking American kid who'd lived in Australia, and he was a funny guy. And I guess there was about half a dozen of us sort of got around. The funny thing was, Phil Mansa would always piss off the Italians, so the Italian kids would chase after him around the schoolyard, and we'd all laugh at that because we thought it was quite funny. I had some really, towards the end of my schooling career, about year 10, I'd started developing acne. Had really bad acne, and it got worse over the sort of progression. You see my school photos. I had the sort of year 8, really clean cut kid with a bowl haircut. Year 9, the same. 10, and then I started getting this acne. And by year 11 and 12, it was really bad, ugly acne, and I had a terrible haircut. And Phil Mansa started calling me the Beast. He said, "You're so ugly. No one will ever love you. We're going to call you the Beast." And I used to sort of have a really heavy bag, and I used to sort of carry it around hunched over. They used to call me Quasimodo, so because the Hunchback of Notre Dame. So it was either Quasimodo, Quasi, or the Beast, and that sort of stuck, I guess, through school, right into university. And when I started my first radio show, I was known as the Beast, and I used to have Phil and Eddie and a few others on the show. And it was so late at night that it was almost morning. It was actually morning because it was 12:30 in the morning. So we called it breakfast with the Beast, and that's where the show started. But it was very unstructured, very unprofessional. I'd literally have the guys in and say, "Hey guys, say something funny," and I put them on the spot. And of course, that's really funny when you don't prepare. So we used to do things like 2 turntables. We'd play a song on one, and we found a sound effects disc in the library of animal sound effects. And we called it the Farmyard Mix. So we'd play a song like Racy's, Some Girls, and on the other one we'd play this animal sound effects, and it just sounded so stupid that it was funny. But we thought it was funny. I don't know if anyone else thought it was funny. We just sort of developed things like that. Farmyard
you
Mix.
Didn't care. You didn't care. Like, that's another thing about your confidence. It's like you didn't care if anyone else found it funny. Sometimes in life, what I found, I actually did a stand-up comedy set. One of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done in my life. Not many people know that. I was very, very nervous for this. I go on stage a lot to do my own music and all that, and that's fine. But this stand-up comedy set, I was very nervous for it. And halfway through, I stopped stuttering, and I thought, you know what? My 3 mates were in the audience, and they were laughing at everything I said. And I said, as long as they're laughing, it doesn't matter. And when I thought that, a couple of jokes down the line, everyone else started laughing, because I'm more relaxed. When you start to think about, you know, what other people are feeling and trying to please everyone, you will end up just you'll just fail.
Pleasing no one. Absolutely.
Yeah, no one. In the words of Ricky Gervais, try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. And I think that's really interesting. We've actually got an audience question. Solis doesn't know about this, so I'm gonna ask this question. This is from a guy called Levy. And
Levy.
He doesn't know it's going to you. It's just an audience question. We will take one out. He wants to know your opinions on toxic masculinity and how it's affecting male confidence, especially in young males. That's roundabout his question. It's very poorly written, so I'm not actually going to read it how it is, but that's the truth.
Thank you anyway, Levy.
It's a great question. I guess, you know, again, I grew up in a background, you know, from being a 69 baby and working in the 80s, that toxic, we call it toxic masculinity. I can't even say the word toxic masculinity now, but back then it was just, you know, everyone's having a laugh. I think I look back and a lot of things I now remember from back then wouldn't be appropriate now. Yeah, we've got to be respectful of each other, and we're all humans, and the things that we may say and do, if it's hurtful to others, whether it's not just a different gender, but a different sexual orientation or a different, someone from a different cultural background, to hurt someone is not a cool thing at all. And I think we all agree with that. But I think a lot of people, you talk about sort of humor, and Ricky Gervais is a classic example of that. A lot of people think he's hilarious, but a lot of others think he goes over the mark. And again, there's that sort of very defined circle about the funnier the joke is, gets closer to the edge of the boundary. But then if you go too far off it, it could really fall flat and just be offensive. And Ricky Gervais in the past has been accused of actually going over the boundary. I think nowadays a lot of young men probably would double think about what they're about to say. You know, you talk about what you've done, Linus. Stand-up comedy is fantastic, and being authentic. And I think that's such an important thing when it comes to confidence, not trying to be someone you're not. I talked before about fake it till you make it. Look, if you're in a new job and you've got to fake it for a little while until you make it, yep, do it. And when it comes down to it, you've got to be authentic. You've got to be yourself. And if yourself means being a little bit inappropriate sometimes with your jokes, that's fine, as long as you're cognizant that you're not going to offend and hurt people. And I think these days, we do it with the show as well, we may not blurt out the first thing we talk about. We put a little bit of a filter to say, okay, I'm about to say this. And in a split second, you sort of ask yourself, is this going to offend someone? Is this appropriate? And I think a lot of people these days, and you talked about, you know, your demographics now, probably overthink it and maybe don't want to make that leap and would rather be conservative and not be outspoken because for the fear of offending someone. I think you've just got to take that fear and just put it in perspective to say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? If I do offend someone, how bad will it be? Will it be mild? And if it is mild, I can apologize and that's fine and we can talk about it. That's okay. If it's not mild and it's really offensive, yes, that would hurt someone. You don't want that. So what is that sort of level? How far are you prepared to risk it? It's like a stock market, you know, how much are you prepared to stake your whole life savings on the share, or you're prepared to put 10% on? I guess you always sort of think about before you're about to say something, whether it's in a conversation or on a podcast or on a stand-up comedy routine, how much am I prepared to stake? The more I stake, the more risk, the more reward. But I think these days, a lot of people are saying, no, I'm just going to stake a little bit because I don't want to risk staking too much and offending too many people. I think it's all in a matter of measure. Well,
I think they haven't changed. Nothing's changed. And that's linking quite a lot with political correctness. Nothing's actually changed. It's just the stakes got bigger, right? Because think about it this way. It's like, if I say something really offensive and really genuinely awful, I've said that, and that's me being authentic, and thank God we now know he's a dick, right? If you stop limitations and make people then censor themselves in their head, you actually don't know what that person's really like.
Because their personality is not coming out. They're putting so many coats on defending themselves, you don't really know what that person is.
that's a travesty, because you're not really actually seeing who the bad person really is in a room. Every room has a villain in it. And if you put too much limitation on it, and you're not allowed people to be very free with the way they speak, someone should have the moral compass to know, with all the freedoms in the world, with everything that they can say, someone should have the moral compass of what they know in their heart is truly right. And if you put those limitations on, you never really know who the person really is. And I think that's really important. But I think more on the toxic masculinity standpoint, and a big thing that's come up a lot in my life is people saying, right, that certain types of men deal with their problems in certain ways, right? We bottle it up and push on. And for me, that's something that's really helped me in my life, is, you know, just putting everything and compartmentalizing it, and then taking the next step forward. And then eventually I leave those things behind, and they're like all the way back there, and I'm waving at them. But for you, you've got kids, right? How are you instilling that level of confidence to just push on through the hard times and not give up?
Resilience is a major theme these days, and particularly, you know, we've gone through a global pandemic. We're about to go through potentially a recession, so there's always something going on. And with our kids, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, Zoe, and a 10-year-old boy, Sam. They're quite different kids. Sam, he is very much like me. He's a mini me. He's very confident. He jokes a lot. You know, he'll stand up and fart in your face. I don't know where he got that from, but he's got not a care in the world, because he plays footy, and with his footy, he just gets in the ball and he bounces off a lot of kids. He's very resilient in that regard. Zoe's a lot more introverted. She takes things to heart, a little bit more shy. But I think, and it's interesting, actually, we play a board game. It's a bit like Monopoly. It's called Ticket to Ride. I won't explain what it is, but basically sometimes you may have a strategy to get from this city to this city, but the other person will block you, and you've got to find out other ways around it. Now, a couple of times we've played, Zoe's got very upset, and she's cried that she had this all planned out to get from this city to this city, and someone's put a barrier in the way. And what I've tried to explain to her is, darling, that's life, really. You know, we're all going to have our plans on how to get from A to B, but we're always going to get obstacles put in those ways. You've got to find out a way to jump over it or go around it. And that's called resilience. Resilience is such an important thing to have these days. And we're going to get knockbacks galore. Again, we're going to get more, you know, pandemics are going to hit us. We've just got to find creative ways around it. And I think if you can be flexible and creative to find those ways around it, quite often, you know, you may be made redundant from a role, as I have over many years. You may take it to heart and say, it's me, I'm no good, and I shouldn't do this. But I think quite often, if you realise if you're made redundant for a role, you actually end up finding a different role. It's even better. You wouldn't have got to that other role unless you're made redundant from this role. So quite often, those barriers that get put in your way are actually blessings in disguise, because you go on to actually bigger and better things. You may have a girlfriend that's rejected you and broken up with you. Happened to me in the past. You're heartbroken at the time, but then you actually find someone else and you have a great life with them. You have kids, and, you know, again, you wouldn't have met that person if you stayed with this person over here. So I think you just embrace change, embrace everything that's out there in the universe, and just be flexible that things will always happen. Bounce back from them, make mistakes. Ryan Reynolds, I just watched him at the Cannes Advertising Festival that's on this week in Cannes, in the south of France, and Ryan Reynolds said he was so bad at things until he became good. He said, in order to be good at things, and he's great, he's a fantastic actor,
I love
producer,
him,
director, love him, and again, humor is a big part of what he does. But he says, in order to be good at something, you've got to be bad at it first. And he said, and again, that comes back to learning and making mistakes. You know, in order to make mistakes, get obstacles, find creative ways around it. That's all part of life, resilience, and it's a really important skill to have these days.
Solis, do you want to come in for one last question?
Sure, yeah. So I was just listening to what you were saying about sort of seizing the opportunity, and it made me think of, I think it might have even been my dad who said this, but his definition of luck, I think, was opportunity meets preparedness. And I think,
excellent.
Sort of aligning that to confidence. I think if you've got quite a big comfort zone because you've tried things many a time and you've failed, and you know you've learned from that, and then you've got all of that experience, and then something comes up, you can sort of combine the two, and you're confident enough to take that new route and see what happens. So yeah, I can just sort of relate to what you're saying. I found it quite interesting.
I totally agree with what your dad said, and that's so true. And it was like, again, the podcasting experience. It was, we always had the idea to do it, and then just one day I just thought, bugger it, I'm just gonna. I've hired a whole lot of equipment, microphones, a mixing desk, about $1,000 worth of equipment. Don't tell my wife; she doesn't know. And sort of throwing caution to the wind to say, we're just going to give this a go. And what's the worst that could happen? We do a few episodes, it doesn't go anywhere. So what? Return the equipment, so be it. So I think openness meets preparedness is a great mantra to have, because if you do everything you can do to teach yourself as much as you can. I'm a lifelong learner. Like I love reading about stuff. I love learning about new things, whether it's be digital marketing or the latest trend in social media. Like I'm always curious. I've always got a thirst for learning. And the more you can sort of absorb all of that and have that prepared, if something comes along, like the podcast we've done, that just two we do for ourselves, we don't make any money out of it. It's just really something we enjoy. But because of that, the business association here in Adelaide called Business SA picked up on it, and they'll now want me to do a workshop on podcasting for business. And they ran a story because of that. I've got people now that I'm doing podcasts for their business. I've got others that I'm talking to about doing podcasts for their business. So whilst I've got a marketing consultancy, podcasting is actually now becoming a big part of that paid business, where I'm actually producing podcasts for others, whether it's customer focused or sort of internally focused. So again, that preparedness, the fact we had to go, tried podcasting. We just did our 25th episode of the pub test, and we're sort of in season 1 of the work. But because we've had a bit of a go, we've got a bit of a style going, and now we've got businesses saying, hey, I want you to do that for me, and I'm going to pay you for that. So again, it's just being open, learning new things, and then opportunity comes along. You do make your own luck. I do believe in it, because you train yourself up, you get ready, and then opportunities will just sort of fall in place.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's excellent to talk to a fellow podcaster. This is the second one I've run, and I just find it fantastic. I mean, I cannot tell you the opportunities that I got. My whole career that I'm facing now is due to my first episode I ever recorded. Amazing things can happen. And sometimes, as you said, it is about just giving it a go and just throwing caution to the wind. And just before I get Solus has got a big job here. He's going to wrap up this podcast. So I'm very excited for him. But before I do that, I just want to explain a bit about Solvateur and what we're trying to do here. It's not just a podcast. We're also hoping at one point, when things develop, to get guests back in to run webinars with young people our age about different types confidence and skills that you can use in the workplace and in your personal life. Most importantly, in your personal life. I'm sure you, the beast, can talk about what your confidence you use at parties, when you're hanging around the keg and there's a good looking girl around or something like that. But we want to bring these professionals in to have a talk to maybe some people that have a lot of skill but maybe don't have the confidence to use that skill. So I think that it's really important. I think a lot of things come out of something small. It always starts small and then it grows. And that's really important for entrepreneurs that are listening right now. You really do have to stake. You're not staking much at this age. You're really not. I mean, you don't have kids. You don't have a wife. You don't have a husband. You're staking nothing. You're staking nothing but your time. So that's really important. Solus, are you going to wrap us up, mate? Remember, mention our Instagram and all the links are going to be in the description.
I mean, you've already said it, but just coming off of what you said, I think it's great at this age. We really don't have a lot of responsibility, and so it's a perfect time just to seize the opportunity and give something a go. But no, on that note, thank you very much to everyone listening, and Dan, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I very much enjoyed it. And make sure to, as Linus said, subscribe to the YouTube, check out the Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you haven't seen the other episodes, make sure to watch them too. Thank you.